Today, we are talking about different ways to analyze our case studies. We've been talking all along, and Thucydides showed us that it is important to try to learn from the past, to try to look at all kinds of different perspectives, to try to synthesize what we have learned and use that as a model going forward. So we're going to call this today the levels of analysis. And before we get into the outline, just by way of introduction, consider World War II. If we were going to study or analyze World War II according to the levels of analysis, essentially we would ask ourselves these three questions. We would start with the leader of Germany as an example. We could do this with other countries, but let's use Germany. That would be the obvious example. And we would say, what personal factors led to Hitler's actions? We would be looking at him as an individual and trying to figure out how his personal narrative fed into World War II. Second level of analysis is we would look at the nation. And again, we could do it for other nations, but for this video, we'll concentrate on Germany. And we'd say, well, what was going on in Germany? In fact, imagine that Hitler wasn't the leader. What if there had been a different leader? Take, if you can, Hitler out of the equation. What other sort of factors, what other sort of events, what other sort of philosophies and worldviews were taking place in Germany that would have led to World War II? And then finally, the third level of analysis, we would ask ourselves, what was the international situation at the time? So again, our focus would be on Germany, but we would be talking about the other nations around them and how they were interacting with them, and even ones that were not right around them, but relatively far away. So with that introduction in mind, the levels of analysis, we'll call the first one the individual level. And with the individual level, we're almost always going to be looking at the leader of a nation, and we're going to say to ourselves with this level, decision-making often falls to that individual. And so we need to understand that individual. We need to know, what do they think of? How do they utilize the nation's culture, the resources, and the political systems? But again, all of this through the lens of the leader. We also want to know what they think about the international system, because they likely have a worldview. They're going to be a realist or a liberal or a constructivist. And we want to know, what are their views of the international system? Also a little bit like on our thematic orientations. Where does this leader fall in terms of things like, are you more isolationist? Are you more international? Do they believe in globalization, and so on? And then we also want to know about just their personal traits, their ambition, their psych profile, their personality, because these things can have an impact on the decisions that get made and the direction in which a nation moves. This is the individual level. We then move to the second level, which is called the domestic level, and sometimes the national level. We can use those terms interchangeably. And here we're looking at the internal structures and mechanisms of the nation. And one of the major things we would look at would be whether it was set up as a democracy or more in an authoritarian dictatorship way. Clearly, there's going to be some overlap then with our individual level of analysis. We want to know the ideology of the nation. We want to know, does it tend to be more capitalist? Does it tend to be more communist? Is there a battle between ideologies within this nation? Their geography, their demography, their environment, their political culture and domestic politics all play a role. You'll notice that this is very much like what you did with the expert dossier on Iran. That's very much a domestic or national level type of analysis. And then our third level we'll call the system level, also known as the international level, and it's the big picture. It encompasses everything else. And we remind ourselves that most people believe, not everybody, but most people believe that the international system is an anarchic one, the idea that there are no set rules, but nations have a predictable set of fairly stable priorities. They're concerned about sovereignty. They're concerned about security. They're concerned about power. And so at the international level, we are looking at how the different nations operate. The video that we watched about balance of power would be very much of a system level discussion.